Thank you all so much for tuning into this live stream segment of Mikasa Sukasa. As always, I am your humble host, Niko House. And today I am coming to you with almost a repeat video of a video that I did earlier today. Tulsi Gabbard went on to Stephen Colbert's The Late Show. She did famously. Stephen Colbert shilled out of his mind. It was an uncomfortable interview. It wasn't fun for Tulsi. It wasn't fun for the audience there. It wasn't fun for us to watch. The Late Show is supposed to be informative, but it's supposed to be informative through a lens of entertainment and comedy. However, that wasn't the case when Tulsi Gabbard went on to Stephen Colbert. In fact, it was quite the opposite. If you all recall, Stephen Colbert did interview Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez not once but twice in both of those interviews, because she is, even though she is an ally of progressives, even though she is a Democratic socialist, even though she avidly supported Bernie Sanders in 2016, and the only reason she decided to run was because of Bernie Sanders in 2017 and 2018. And she even uses Bernie Sanders' specific platform. Why? Because Justice Democrats took their platform from Bernie Sanders. But nonetheless, both times Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez appeared on Stephen Colbert's show, he treated her beyond amicably. Honestly, he was having fun with her, laughing with her, having a good old time, discussing not only the critiques of her in her advocacy, whatever that may be, but also discussing the good things that she is doing and giving her a chance to actually elaborate on the good she plans on doing, rather than interrogating her and trying to catch her in a bind. So the energies of the interviews were completely different, like the difference between Tulsi's interview and Stephen and AOC's interview. So obviously we know that Tulsi Gabbard is an enemy of the establishment, and it has become very clear, as Jimmy Dore constantly reminds us, 6 media companies run the entire media industry. And it's clear, right? Because if you watch the interview, which unfortunately I cannot play again, you would find out that they literally asked, almost verbatim, the exact same questions that were on MSNBC and Morning Joe, the exact same questions that were on The View, the exact same questions that were present during the town hall, and they just regurgitated them. And the sad part is, it was clear that Stephen Colbert was given these questions, because he even says himself, I don't know much about any of these issues. Then he goes on to speak and it's assertive. Well, he goes on to inquire in a very assertive, matter-of-factly way, like he knows what he's talking about, and therefore everyone should listen to him. So, irritated was an understatement. Irritated was an understatement. I was watching that 7 minutes, and I'm just like, this ooh, that boy. Look, but it's okay though. Because, as always, Tulsi handled herself perfectly. She rolled those questions like a brand new Cadillac, not the North Star versions, though, because those always break down. One of the new Cadillacs. But, interestingly enough, I think much to the dismay of the establishment and of Stephen Colbert and whoever his puppet masters are, the crowd seemed to be vibing with Tulsi rather than vibing with Stephen Colbert. Tulsi mentioned the war in Iraq while she was explaining why we should not be pursuing any type of regime change wars unless it is a threat to the national security of the United States. And guess what? Once again, not surprisingly, okay, the crowd did clap when she brought up the war in Iraq, cut her off to do so. Now, here is what was somewhat surprising after all the fear-mongering and demonization and war drum beating by the mainstream media. Stephen Colbert actually asked her directly, do you think that the war in Syria is worth it? First of all, let's be very clear about something. If you're calling it a war in Syria, I would like to know where Congress decided to declare a war, because I wasn't present for that. I didn't cover that. I didn't see that in the news. I didn't hear about a vote for that. None of our congresspeople have talked about that. Why are we calling it a war in Syria? Why are we just randomly okay with our involvement in a country, and we're spending money on weapons in the country and sending weapons to rebels in the country and sending soldiers to a country that we have never ever voted on as far as declaring war? Why are we doing that, and why is that okay? That's not one of the questions that Stephen Colbert asked. Instead, he asked, is this war in Syria worth it? Now, once again, much to the chagrin of the establishment, when Tulsi said no and left it at that, the crowd clapped for her as well. You even got a woo out of somebody. For real, you did. I was kind of like taken aback. I said, oh, wait a minute now. I wasn't expecting that. All right, we might be onto something. Because it seems to me that the overall audience of most of these shows, yeah, they may think Colbert is funny. They may not be as, I don't want to say hardline as we are, because we're a little hardline. I'm not going to watch somebody I don't think is telling the truth. That's just the type of person I am. Not everybody's like that. Some people just want to be entertained, and that's okay as well, as long as they don't buy into the bullshit. Maybe some people just really like to laugh, and that's fine. But just because they like to laugh, just because they think you're entertaining, doesn't mean they're going to take you seriously when the issues that Tulsi Gabbard or Bernie Sanders or even an Ilhan Omar speaks to affects them daily in different ways. And I think that there is, once again, this collective conscious developing of all of the issues that not only affects people at home, but abroad as well. Syria being one of those issues, as demonstrated whenever they clapped for her out of in this show with Stephen Colbert. And they also, once again, did the same during the town hall meeting, even after the mainstream media has been beating the war drums. This has been making it difficult for the mainstream to manufacture the consent that they've been able to manufacture for literally 100 years of previous wars. Whether it be the war in South Africa that people don't really remember and how that started. That was literally out of nowhere. It was out, and it wasn't out of nowhere as it was conducted by Cecil Rhodes. But then on to World War II, where we all were taught, oh, the war started over Franz Ferdinand, and everybody who had a brain in middle school and high school, they were like, yeah, World War I started because some guy named Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. Well, was he German or something? No. Was he British? No. Was he a king? No. What was he then? He was an Archduke of Austro-Hungary. Well, did the Germans assassinate him? No. Did Great Britain assassinate him? No. Then why the hell are they ones at war? Yeah. They had to manufacture consent because Great Britain wanted to take Germany off their high horse because they were working alongside Russia at one point, but they were basically dominating the European economy, and it was getting to the point where they were getting not out of control, as in they were threatening to harm somebody, but just out of control industrially, because they had become so successful in modern industrialization, very similar to the United States. So they had manufactured consent for World War I. Now, obviously, if they never manufactured consent for World War I, guess where we would be at in World War II? Never would have happened. But there was a board established after World War I, or during and then after World War I. George W. Bush was on George W. Bush's great-great-grandfather was on that board. Another fun fact that people don't know. Actually, one grade. It wasn't even two grades. It was one grade. That was actually how the Bushes established their millions. And there was a board that was dedicated to maintaining a wartime economy. It was called the War Industry Advisory Board. So there was literally an entire board for manufacturing consent. Control of the media was obviously one of the main pillars of this, along with several other factors. But the main mechanism that has to be deployed is media control, narrative control. The narrative is no longer able to be controlled, and it is frustrating them. So they just have to repeat themselves and 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 repeat themselves. But it isn't working anymore. It isn't working anymore. So I was happy to hear them clap about Syria. And then what was awesome was when Tulsi goes on to elaborate about Syria. Once again, something that no one else, in my opinion, has done enough of. And the last person we know who called out these people, we know what happened to him. It was JFK. Tulsi actually explains how the war in Syria took off. She literally says the CIA in 2011 went into Syria and tried to topple the regime, failed to topple the regime, but did try to, under the guise of different, they did it covertly. We did it with humanitarian aid. But basically, Tulsi is fighting back with narrative control with the correct narrative, being unafraid to challenge the legitimacy and the authenticity of the alphabet agencies. I think that's beautiful. Osama Qasim, weird that when Colbert was giving that thank you speech, he never asked Hillary about her taking money from the Saudi government or selling them arms. Right? Isn't that interesting? A matter of fact, if you really want to know the truth, none of the people get talked about. So, for example, Tulsi gets asked about her Hindu nationalism all the time, which is bullshit. And it is quite Hindu phobic. It is. Once again, you know my phrase, you ain't got to take my word for it. Kamala is actually Indian. She actually has more of a connection to India than Tulsi does. Not just metaphorically. I mean, she still is in constant contact with her family from India because she was really close to her mother. Her aunt flew in from India to help her campaign for the Senate. When Modi came from India, Kamala Harris acted like her boy crush was coming to the United States. Just several pictures with them. Not only several pictures with him, but several tweets praising him. Praising him. And she is actually Indian. But there is no claiming of support of Hindu extremism on Kamala's behalf. But yet, people are claiming that, or at least the mainstream media is trying to claim that Tulsi Gabbard is primarily supported by Hindu extremists and she supports the Hindu extremist regime. It's not true. But it's interesting how they, they'll invent whatever smear they have to try and get their point across. But yeah, like I was saying, I am glad to know that there is somebody who is absolutely willing to push back on nonsensical narratives by the mainstream and actually call out the intelligence agencies. Because once again, the last time we saw somebody do that, we know what happened next. And so every time Tulsi mentions the CIA, every time Tulsi mentions the FBI, every time Tulsi mentions history, she's putting her life in danger potentially. And that should not be taken for granted for everyone who's trying to figure out whether or not she's a legitimate progressive, whether or not, hell, don't even call her a progressive. I mean, yeah, I call her a progressive, but even if you're libertarian, if you're conservative, you don't need to be worrying about what label she has or what party she belongs to. You need to be figuring out if somebody's an ally or not, right? Are they honest? Are they actually running because they're doing what they think is best for the people, or are they running for their elitist friends? In Tulsi, putting her life on the line every day by mentioning the intelligence agencies, I mean, she's an ally, not just to one side of the political fence. And I think that can't be stressed enough, and it shouldn't be taken for granted. Colbert goes on to ask Tulsi, do you think he's a war criminal? Why did you meet with that man? But he premised that question with saying, I don't know much about this stuff. When you prime yourself like that, you know what he was doing, because he saw that he was losing the crowd. This isn't only Colbert. We've seen this about every time someone thinks, every time somebody thinks they have Tulsi on the ropes. They think that, and then the crowd kind of like, wow, I mean, shoot, she's saying commonsensical things. It isn't like this stuff isn't hard to figure out whether or not she's telling the truth. You literally, even Google will tell you the truth about this type of stuff. So she goes on and corrects him, of course, as usual, and says, and I love her. No offense to, like, even if his people were being gassed by him, even if, it's irrelevant. It is non-consequential when we're discussing whether or not we should be conducting a regime change war, rather than allowing a people to realize and self-determine their own freedom, their own liberty. And there is something to be gained from that as a people, a certain appreciation, a certain pride in that freedom. Every political study has shown that when people are fighting for their freedom, for their countries, they are more likely to be victorious. If people are fighting, or if they're fighting because they've been conscripted or drafted, or if they're being helped in a way that isn't really help, like when it comes from an overabundance of aid from another major country who has interests in the fight that you're fighting, then oftentimes, and especially if that war is being manufactured by that major country, a lot of times it doesn't end well for anybody. The country still remains destabilized. History has shown this. We prop up 2/3 of the dictators in the world. It's interesting that Stephen Colbert and his establishment, like I said, the establishment shill choir of Meghan McCain and all these other ones. It's interesting to me how they never ask any other candidate about the other 2/3 of dictators that we prop up. It's interesting to me that we're still, the Yemeni people are still being killed. And yet, where's the mention at? We're so concerned about the people in Venezuela who voted their president in and is only in their position because of what the United States is doing. We're so concerned with the people in Syria. How about you ask for Tulsi's the advocacy that she has brought about when it comes to having a conversation about Yemen and holding Saudi Arabia accountable and to stop dealing with them? Never happens. Interesting, right? But this is why people shouldn't take them seriously. This is why we have to keep harping on these videos. That's why we have to keep covering these interviews, because people are looking, people are researching, and people are figuring this stuff out, and they're figuring out the establishment. So she says that it's irrelevant. If he gas his own people, he should be held accountable, but he should be held accountable with the proper procedures. Y'all know how I feel about that entire situation. You know, I already told y'all, Mattis already said he didn't do it. There's no evidence of it. Mattis said this. Neoconservative warmongering extraordinaire said this. Not me, former Defense Secretary Mattis. That guy said it. But even still, it's irrelevant if we're talking about whether or not we should be instituting regime change wars, instead of, once again, allowing the people of Syria or people of various nations to determine their own destiny and do what they have to do to gain their freedom. That's part of liberty. Liberty is not we're born free, quote unquote, but liberty is earned, because somebody's always going to try to take it from you. So of course, that's easy for me to say, right? As somebody who's born into the social contract of the United States for people who've died for me. That's how I know that's how it's earned. But I know it's harder. It's easier said than done. But at the same time, it doesn't make it any less true. People have to fight for their own freedom, especially when the only help that's being offered from a country with self-interest in the outcome of whatever civil war your country is having. And she caps it off by saying, because Stephen Colbert says, once again, in my limited knowledge of all this stuff that I'm talking about, but I've never even researched, but I got these talking points. I'm reading them off the card as they're given to me. Yeah, if we don't invade countries and play the world police, then it'll leave a vacuum for countries like Russia and China. Oh my God. McCarthyism 101, right? You throw out a bunch of buzzwords and you hope the American people flinch. It's basically what he was doing. Didn't work though. He called the United States an instrument of good. That wasn't flying either. Tulsi said beautifully, in order to be a force of good, we have to do good. Have we been doing good? Have we been legitimately and altruistically applying the same principles that we preach as a country? And the answer would be obviously, hell no, we have not at all. Not even close. We're giving weapons to Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is bombing Yemen as we speak. As we speak, another life was just lost in Yemen. We just found out in Venezuela, the New York Times reported a false flag operation in Venezuela that was conveniently done to conveniently benefited our narrative. We're demanding. We have Marco Rubio, and that's that boy. Marco Rubio is shield-tastic, isn't he? Marco Rubio is hilarious because Marco Rubio don't even show up to work. This man doesn't even show up to vote, people. Marco Rubio hasn't said shit all year. He talked about the election fraud in Florida because it's his state, so we'll give him that. But other than that, we ain't hear about Marco Rubio. We ain't hear from Marco Rubio. But boy howdy, when the Koch, because this whole Venezuela operation has Koch brothers' hands all over it, and the Koch brothers are one of Marco Rubio's primary financiers. So boy, they pulled his number and they said, "Hey, Marco, we need you to token yourself out. Tokenize. You about to be tokenized. We need you to remind everybody that you are Latino and how much you are advocating for for Maduro to be unseated. We need you to speak Spanish. We need you to be in Colombia for some odd reason. We need you to always tweet about Venezuela and call Maduro a terrorist." And boy, and he has been wearing that token proudly. But nonetheless, we have not been doing good. We haven't. And when she said that, the crowd gave her a roaring applause, as they should have. Overall, Tulsi did fantastically. And once again, it was just really disappointing to see Stephen Colbert chill out like that. It was not, aren't doing as well as they used to. I know they don't have the influence that they used to. But nonetheless, it's still pretty sad to me. But if Tulsi keeps handling herself like this, I told y'all, they don't stop having Tulsi on. Because she keeps doing, extraordinarily. And if she keeps doing this extraordinary on these interviews, they're going to stop allowing her to do the interviews. Every time she comes on where they try to damage her, boom, she ends up coming out on top and increasing her profile, gaining more followers, more people are viewing her YouTube videos, etc., etc., etc. So make sure you go donate to Tulsi Gabbard. Like I said, this video got taken down, the original video that I did on this topic, so make sure you share this one. Greatly appreciate it. And make sure that if you have not subscribed, make sure you are still subscribed. People have been forcibly unsubscribed. We lost, mysteriously, like 1,300 subscribers in a 28-day span. It made no sense. There was no rhyme or reason to it. The only thing that we could see, the only pattern that we could see is that the more videos we uploaded, in case you haven't heard this before, sometimes when we upload a video, before it even gets finished processing, people will have unsubscribed just based off of the video being uploaded. It doesn't make any sense. It isn't normal. It isn't a real practice. Like, nobody does that. Nobody cares that much to upload while a video is still processing, because people wouldn't even know that the video was uploaded yet, and people will be forced to unsubscribe. So we have days where we upload 4 or 5 videos, and because of that, we'll have lost 300 subscribers, 400 subscribers in a day, but it doesn't get noticed because we'll gain 700 to 800 subscribers. But over the last couple of days, like I've said in the beginning of this video, a lot of people have been forcibly unsubscribed, had their notification bells turned off. Like I said, if you know who Kim Iverson is, I'm sure many of you do. Kim Iverson told me that her father was unsubscribed from her channel and hadn't been getting her notifications. Like her father, who was a political junkie, is always watching this stuff, wasn't getting her notifications and had to go back and resubscribe and re-hit that notification bell. So make sure that you're still subscribed. You can once again help prop up the show, help keep us running by going to the Patreon link in the description below and helping us hit our goal of 500 patrons by donating as little as $1. Some people donate $1, some people donate $5, some people have donated even two people I think have donated $100. So whatever you can do, it helps us out. Lets us know that we're bringing the content that you want, and it helps us continue to be able to focus on giving you that content. But more than anything else, always remember, find your balance.